Köszönöm szépen.
Hello everyone, I'm still turning my camera and microphone on, so I'm just waiting for all the students to join because I've realized that we've got 20 participants, but we are still waiting for a few more. So this is why I have not turned on my camera yet, okay? Last week, as far as I remember, last week there were altogether 25 students. So I do trust that others will come.
Egyébként ez is olyan érdekes, hogy megint ilyen szervezési dolog, hogy olyan tanár, amelyik ott ül most már negyed órával előtte, ugye akkor ha belép az ember...
I'll give it one more minute and then we shall start, okay?
A másik, van, aki most
I'm copying our first link to the chat box, okay?
Nem akarja, hanem akkor ugye a prezentációját, vagy valamit néz, és szóval nem látja, és akkor nem lehet.
I have copied the first link to the chat box. I'm asking you to kindly open it, please, okay?
Tehát most dönts el az ember, hogy mit csináljon. Tehát ez is olyan, hogy valamelyik reklamál, hogy miért nem vagyunk ott, valamelyik ide.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. So we are going to start the class right now. I would like to have a very short feedback, please, if you can hear me.
Yes.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And I also would like to have a feedback, please, if you can see the link.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good, very good. So I'm going to turn off my camera now. Obviously, I leave my microphone on and I start the explanation, and I'm going to ask you questions if you hear me. Okay, so very good. Please open the link. I'm going to share with you several links, but I'm asking you to kindly open the link on the Smithsonian Agreement because it is highly, highly important. Okay. So what I would like to underline, it is the same link that we have checked out last week. It is from the Federal Reserve History. I'm going to upload it to the Moodle system this afternoon. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that basically the so-called Bretton Woods system, a so-called four-pillared economic system that was established parallelly to the establishment of the UN system, basically existed until 1971. The four pillars of the system were the so-called International Framework Program for the regulation of international trade that had one name, one terminology, which was the multilateral trading system. And the multilateral trading system was based on an agreement that was titled the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, GATT. General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Actually, we all know already that it was a substitute of an international trade organization that never came to existence. However, it regulated international trade among countries until the 1st of January 1995. The second pillar of the so-called Bretton Woods system was the IMF, an international monetary fund that was meant to mitigate international financial risks, so the risks that are deriving from the unifications of the financial markets. And actually, this monetary fund, which is also regarded as a lender of last resort, a final helper, a lender of last resort, is still existent today. The third pillar of the so-called Bretton Woods system was the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And actually, this is the legal predecessor of the current World Bank. And the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development had basically two pillars. One pillar that was meant to facilitate the rebuilding of the then developed countries. It was the rebuilding part of the bank. And there was another part of the bank, another pillar, which was the developmental part of the bank, that was to facilitate the mitigation of structural weaknesses. So once more, structural weaknesses of the developing nations of the world. Obviously, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development evolved throughout the times, and it became the World Bank with many, many sub-institutions. However, the original concept, so the original idea, is still in existence. However, there was a fourth pillar of the so-called Bretton Woods system, and it was, and please scroll down, so please scroll down in this page, and actually it was a so-called exchange rate system, which you can see obviously, that was based on the gold reserves held by the United States of America. It was a conversion system, as I told you last week, 1 ounce of gold for $35 and a fixed exchange rate among other countries' currencies and the US dollar. And actually this gold standard system, or if you go down this page, the so-called gold window, so the exchange from other currencies to US dollars and from US dollars to gold, was basically stopped by President Richard Nixon on the 21st of December 1971 in Washington, the so-called Smithsonian Institute. And actually, once this Smithsonian agreement was signed, actually a snowball effect was initiated in the international trading order, international monetary system. I am asking you, I'm going to copy this page to the Moodle system. However, I'm going to very quickly explain you what has happened. Actually, in 1971, it came very clear to the US government that actually, on one hand, they cannot fulfill the physical demands on gold. Sorry, once more. So it became very clear to the US government that they cannot fulfill the physical demands on gold of the other nations because they are physically running out of gold reserves. So this was one of the reasons why Richard Nixon initiated the replacement of the gold window or the gold standard system. However, there was another reason. The demand on the dollar, so the demand on the currency, the demand on the US dollar wasn't initiated by natural economic forces. It wasn't initiated by the performance of the US economy. So it wasn't propelled, it wasn't driven by the real effectiveness of the real performance of the US economy. Instead, it was initiated by a solely financial market underlying principle, namely the demand on US dollars. So actually, the US dollar appreciated. So the US dollar appreciated. It wasn't appreciated by the Federal Reserves. So it wasn't appreciated by the Central Bank of America. The US dollar appreciated by or through or via external financial forces. And with a highly appreciated dollar, the US trade, so the US trade became uncompetitive. So the United States of America faced a very tricky situation because of the highly appreciated dollars. Basically, imports were very expensive and exports were basically impossible, or I would translate, or I would say that the export performance of the United States of America massively deteriorated. So actually, the decision, and it is written in this text, that the decision was basically to quit the gold standard system, to close the so-called gold windows, so to close the gold window and actually depreciate the US dollar massively. Actually, the situation was that because of the appreciated dollar, the United States of America had to pay more for its imports and had less possibilities to export. And actually, they wanted to regain their international trade competitivity. So they wanted to regain their competitiveness in international trade. And what happened was as follows. I'm going to copy another link. So I am going to copy another link to the chat. Which is about the first oil crisis. Have you got it? Have you got it?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Please open the link. So please open the link and I'm going to explain. It is about the first oil crisis. What has the first oil crisis have to do with the United States of America quitting the gold standard system or closing the gold window? Actually, what they did was as follows. The United States of America depreciated the US dollar after 1971, and actually to regain their competitiveness, they have risen the prices of their crucial export products, first and foremost to those countries that were dependent on the US export products. So I'm going to be very explicit. Those countries that were, for instance, dependent on US wheat, grain, and other exports to these Arabic oil exporting countries, the countries of the OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. These are Arabic countries that were exporting oil to the United States of America. Actually, they have experienced a massive rise of the prices of the products that the United States of America exported to these countries, and of which these countries were importers of. And obviously and very clearly, these countries did not want to tolerate this kind of price rise in international exports. And the then Shah of Iran, Reza Shah, who was actually a great friend of the West. So Reza Shah was visualized, was seen as a Western-friendly Iranian leader. He said in an article published in the New York Times in 1972 that he can understand very well that the United States of America is compensating for the losses that it has suffered under the existence of the Bretton Woods system, and namely the gold standard system. And Reza Shah, so the Iranian Shah, the representative of the OPEC countries, also expressed that he understands very, very well that basically the export prices of the US products are risen because the United States of America basically wants to cash in on exports and wants to rise the export incomes and wants to correct its trade balance. However, this is a huge loss for those countries that are importers of American products. So actually, it is not a retaliation. So it is not with a vindictive initiative, with a vindictive intent. It is just the sheer economic rationale that actually those products or the prices of those products that are exported to the US from these oil exporting countries can be risen, can be advanced as well. So it happened, actually, in 1973. So in 1973, on one hand, the prices of these export products were risen, I mean, from the OPEC countries. And actually, they were, you can read it in this article, and this is why I share this article. Actually, the prices of the oil products quadrupled. So have risen fourfold. They have quadrupled to $12 a barrel. In the end, oil exports to the United States, Japan, and to the Western world, so Western Europe, and these three regions, so the United States of America, Japan, and Western Europe, were considered as the center of the global economy at the beginning of the 1970s. So oil exports to the economic center of the world, so US, Japan, and Western Europe, were prohibited, and actually the center of the world consumed more than half of the world's energy. So this was a very huge hit. So it was a very huge hit. And actually, I have shared this article because I would like you to look at this picture. You can see pictures from the first oil crisis, so 1973, 1974 cars. And the reason why I shared this picture is as follows. Actually, because of the prohibition, so because of the ban of exports, oil exports to US, Japan, and Europe, actually there was such a shortage in the US economy on oil that on even days of the week, only cars with number plates ending on an even number were allowed to drive. And on odd days of the week, only cars that ended on an odd number were allowed to drive. So actually, the ban on oil basically numbed the entire Western economy. So the lack of the oil input basically stunted the entire Western economy. Do you understand me? I'm switching my camera on. Can you understand me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the point is, So what I am trying to explain, and this is what I tried to prepare last week because it is hugely, hugely important. So actually, John Maynard Keynes and Harry Dexter White initiated a four-pillared system for the post-war economy. IMF, World Bank, the gold standard system, and the International Trade Organization, or a multilateral trading system, whatever you call it. However, all of these initiatives were to help the global economy. So all of these initiatives were to underpin the internationalization or the unification of share markets. However, you can imagine the Bretton Woods system as a table with four legs. And actually, one of the legs didn't function very well. And this one leg was the so-called gold standard system, which made basically the US, which made a rift. This is the good word. So it made a rift in the US economy. And the rift was between the real economy and the financial economy. So basically, commodity markets and financial markets. So actually, it became very clear at the end of the 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s that the real economy, basically the market of goods and services, and the financial markets are not going hand in hand. The financial markets are basically propelling, outperforming the real economy, and the rift is externally driven. The rift is driven by the demand on US dollars. And actually what happened was, and this is explained in this link, in this Smithsonian Agreement Federal Reserve history, and this is what I would like you to read and know for the exam, that actually the reaction of the US economy was to quickly close the window and basically count their losses. Basically, the US economy and Nixon was counting their losses suffered by the gold standard system. And they very quickly wanted to compensate with international trade by depreciating the dollar on one hand. So they were depreciating the dollar on one hand. They were obviously stopping the direct exchange of US dollars to gold because they were running out of gold reserves. And on the third place, which is hugely important, they were raising the prices of their export products, especially to those countries that were reliant on US export products. And actually, what happened in 1973 and 1974 was a reaction from those countries that were directly involved in the US on a trade basis, namely the OPEC countries, so the oil exporting, petroleum exporting countries, and that were basically 6 countries. And they were not officially, but unofficially represented by the opinion, by the stances of the then Iranian Shah Reza, who once more was a huge friend of the West. However, he said that actually losses in the US economy cannot be compensated from outside of the world, so from other side of the world. And as a first reaction, they have risen the prices of petroleum oil. And on the second place, they physically stopped the exports to Europe, the US, and Japan. And actually, it was a huge asymmetric, so non-symmetric, this is what I'm saying. It was a huge non-symmetric financial shock, the Smithsonian Agreement, that basically created the first global economic downturn, the first global economic and financial crisis in 1973. Why I am showing it to you? Actually, I'm very happy if you read this article from the Britannica Encyclopedia, and I would like to stop here because the first oil crisis happened in 1973 and 1974, and it was a direct consequence of the Smithsonian Agreement. So the first oil crisis was an absolute and direct consequence of the Smithsonian Agreement. However, another oil crisis happened in 1979, so in 1979, which was the consequence or the result of the Iranian Revolution in 1978-1979. The two oil crises, I mean in plural, so the two oil downturns, 1973-4 and 1979, cannot be further discussed in our class because it is irrelevant. We are just you're losing time, and I would like to go on the explanation of the G6 countries. But to understand the G6 countries, so actually to embed because what I would like to do right now, I would like to explain you on the G6 countries, but I am unable to explain to you on the G6 countries if you don't know the Bretton Woods system, and if you don't know the first two oil crises, and if you don't know the interlink between the Smithsonian Agreement and the first oil crisis. So therefore, I am stopping here and I'm telling that there is a potential, there is a possibility to write an activity paper. So an activity paper is cordially welcome on the impact of the Smithsonian Agreement and the first two oil crises, so 1973, 1974, and 1979. So once more, there is a possibility to hand in an activity paper for 10 activity points, as you know, and the paper should be on the Smithsonian Agreement 1971 and its impact on the first two oil crises 1973 and 1979. I'm going to go back to the multi-party meeting. Have you understood me? Could you get me, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you are very cordially invited to write this paper because now we need to go on. And I am sharing again a link and you will understand why I have spoken so much about the Bretton Woods system, the Smithsonian Agreement, and the first oil crisis. You are kindly invited to open the link, please. So you are kindly invited to open the link, please. It is the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. It's a German foundation, the Green Political Foundation. Actually, I love this picture. So actually, I really love this picture. And actually, I'm sharing one more. So I'm sharing one more, which is the balance. Got it? The balance and the Böll Stiftung. Have you got it?
Yes.
Very good. So there are going to be two more, but I'm sharing one by one. Okay. So let us start. So let us start with the balance. It is written G7 Summit, its members, history, purpose, and meeting summaries. Actually, what I would like you to do is, sorry, my phone is on. I will switch it off. So what I would like to do is as follows. Please read only the first 3.5 lines and you are going to understand everything. So please read the first 3.5 lines starting after G7 member countries and other attendees. It is written, and now I'm going to read out the sentence and I'm going to explain. So actually, G7 member countries are the United States of America, the UK, France, Japan, Germany, Italy, and Canada. The first 6 countries were the original members of the G6. It was the first summit, so its first summit was held in Rambouillet, France in 1975. Canada joined in 1976, making it G7, and Russia joined later in 1997, making it the G8. Full stop. So, actually, I'm going to be very honest with you. Now you are understanding the direct impact of the first oil crisis on the G6 and G7 members. We need to understand that in 1973 and 1974, oil exports to the then center, I would like to underline then center, so THEN, so then center of the global economy, namely UK, US, France, Germany, Japan, and Italy were basically reduced, so they were diminished, and in the end, oil exports to these countries fully stopped, making the economies of these countries stunned and numb. So, establishing the G6 on an initiation of France in 1975 was nothing else but a crisis reaction. It is very important to understand that the now center of the global economy, so the G20 countries, basically were initiated by a global economic shock, a global economic crisis based on the discrepancy of the US financial and real markets. So a financial disbalance caused the rift in the US economy. The financial rift and the disbalance of the US economy caused a disbalance in the global trade, in the global economy initiated by the OPEC countries. And actually it destabilized the entire global economy. First and foremost, the most advanced countries, the developed countries, that were at that time the US, Japan, and very developed European countries, namely France, Germany, and Italy. Actually, these countries were also called the so-called triad because they look like a triangle. So a triangle between the US, Japan, and Western Europe, so they were called the triad or the triangle. These 6 countries convened in 1975 in Rambouillet in France, as you can see in this article. And actually they have formulated the group of 6, and they have later invited Canada to join them in 1976 because Canada was equally impacted, just like the United States of America. So Canada joined a year later. Actually, as you can see, there was an expansion. So there was an expansion in 1997 because the group was joined by Russia. And actually, you know why? Because at the end of the 1990s, basically the Asian and the Russian financial crisis happened. And Dr. Katalin Völgyi spoke about it 2 weeks ago, that actually emerging economies of the world, so emerging economies of the world, experienced huge investments in the financial markets. However, these investments at the end of the 1990s into the then emerging economies were unstable because they were not directed towards the capital markets. So they were not stable investments that were rooted in the real economy. They were again investments directed towards the financial economy. And once these countries that were defined by Antoine von Achtmeier as emerging, once these countries didn't deliver the two-digit growth that they have experienced at the beginning of the 1990s, capital would flee. So there was a capital flight from these countries, leaving the financial and real economies of these countries to crumble, to basically, crumble, to fall down, and suffering massive financial and economic crises. So actually, what I would like to explain you, so what I would like to suggest you, what I would like to tell you, that basically the G6, the G7, the G8, and the G20, I'm going to come down to the G20, is nothing else. So is nothing else but a crisis committee. I know it is very rude, so please don't take my words literally. I'm just trying to explain you that actually the 6, 7, 8, and then 20 nations of the world were always shaken by a crisis, and actually a crisis committee was convened, and actually a crisis committee was invited to find answers to the crises, the downturns of the world. In 1975, it was because of the first oil crisis. In 1997, in 1998, it was because of the Mexican, Russian, and Asian financial crises. And in 2009, you will see, when the G8 was extended to the G20, it was because of the 2008 global economic downturn. So what I would like you to understand, and it is very important, and I'm going to ask you if you understand me. So actually, there is a crisis, oil crisis. We are reacting with G6 and G7. There is a financial crisis in Mexico, Asia, Russia, and we are reacting again with extending to G8. There is a crisis in 2008, and we are reacting with extending the members of the G8 to G20. So this is why I am saying, though I know it is rude, so it is not a scientific explanation, I'm just trying you to get the point that this is nothing else but a crisis committee, a reaction to how to solve mutually the global financial and economic problems that derive from the unification of the markets. So actually, this is a domino effect. And the question is always, so the question always is how to mitigate the crisis that derives from the interdependence of the commodity, service, financial, capital, and partially labor markets. Do you understand me? Have you understood what I told?
Yes.
Can I have feedback, please?
Yes.
Okay, so if you understand me, then we are not going to scroll down on this one now. So we are going to come back to this one later. I would like you to go to the Green Political Foundation, Heinrich Böll Green Political Foundation, please. Okay, because I just would like to show you this chart because it is lovely. Okay, can you see this chart, please? Can you see the chart?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So this is what I told you. The G7 we know already. G8 we know already, so we are fine. Let's cover the members of the G20 and how they were basically expanded. It is very interesting because if you imagine a map, I'm just trying, actually, I had a very good, I had a very good link that I lost, unfortunately, with members of the, I don't know why I lost it, with members of the G20. I'm trying to find it, but sorry, I don't. So actually, if you imagine the G8 countries, then these are only countries from the Northern Hemisphere. So if you imagine the world, then you can see that these countries, these developed countries, Germany, Russia, UK, France, Canada, US, Italy, and Japan, are all on the Northern Hemisphere of the world. So there is a disproportionateness in the G8 countries. However, if you go through the G20, then you can realize that the G20 is I wouldn't say that a totally just, but a more balanced representation of the countries in the world. And let us go through. So let us go through and read it. So Turkey, first and foremost, Turkey, on the border, on the threshold of Europe and Asia. So there is a country that binds Europe and Asia that is invited to the club, to the G20 club. The second place, the European Union. It is very interesting. The European Union is represented by the European Commission. So basically, the entire European Union is invited to the G20 club, to the most powerful and influential countries of the world. However, the European Union cannot chair the G20. So actually, the European Union is not invited to chair the G20. However, it is invited to participate through the European Commission. Argentina. Argentina is very interesting. Actually, I'm trying to combine Argentina with Brazil. And there is a reason. Because slowly, as we are understanding the role of nations in the world, we are going to understand that the most developed countries in the world are right now, or the most successful countries in the global economy now, are the countries that are big physically, I mean in geographical territory, that are big in population, so big physical territories, big physical populations, and the third precondition for a country being dominant is a big aggregate GDP, so a big total GDP. I tell you why. Because whereas we are counting living standards in per capita GNI or per capita GDP, living standards refer to the fact how the population lives within the framework, within a territory of one country. However, aggregate GDP, so total GDP, is equally important. And I tell you why. Because the aggregate GDP, or the total GDP, leaves space for the country's governance to prioritize. So for instance, if a country wishes to spend money on higher education, on vaccination, on healthcare, on infrastructure, on investment in any industry or services, agriculture, research and innovation, and so on and so forth. Actually, the bigger the aggregate GDP is, the bigger the possibility for a given government is to decide on issues and to allocate resources to issues and to prioritize. So actually, in the 21st century, and this is one of the reasons why I am starting the global economy with a very thorough analysis of nation states or grouping the nation states, because in the 21st century, countries that are big in territory, big in population, and big in aggregate GDP are very lucky, are very lucky. Okay, what does it have to do with Argentina and Brazil? Because obviously, Brazil itself is a huge country. We are going to come to the BRICS countries. So the next grouping after the G20 will be the BRICS countries. This is what I am trying to introduce. So basically, Brazil is lucky itself because it is huge in population, huge in territory, and huge in aggregate GDP. Why I am mentioning Argentina? Because I would like to explain, or I would like to tell you that obviously, if we look at these three criteria, so GDP, population, and territory, there are about 200 countries in the world. We know that we consider each and every economic entity that is over 30,000 people of population as a country, even though there is no sovereignty. So actually, we know that there are approximately 200 countries of the world, and the globe is as big as it is, so it is not going to expand. So physically, countries cannot grow in their size. So, okay, so there is a physical constraint. What do you do then? So there are big countries and smaller sized countries and small countries. And what happens if a country is small? The answer is regional integration. So actually, those countries in the world that are considered as small actually can translate their interests, or can send their interests, or can transcend their interests. That's the best word. So can transcend their interests into the global economy via regional integrations, because a regional integration breaks down the borders between trade of goods and services, financial markets, capital markets, and labor markets, which means a regional integration acts if the territory, the region, would be one single country. So basically, this is the aim of the European Union. When we were speaking about the flying geese pattern of Saburo, Okita, Kojima, and Akamatsu, we said that actually all the three of them said that the European Union is a very noble notion. So it is a very high idea. They only argued that actually it is impossible to achieve the same economic standards and then unify. Eastern Asian politicians and economists said that actually it is more feasible, it is more imaginable in a multi-sequential model. So it is more convincible in a multi-sequential model as opposed to the European Union's horizontal model. But the aim of the much beleaguered European Union is a unified financial market, the Eurozone, the unified labor market, the unified commodity markets, and obviously the unified capital markets. Because if all the markets are unified within the region, then the countries of the region act actually on the platform of the global economy as one single country. Why is it important? And now I'm going to come back to Argentina and Brazil. The reason why it is so important, because as you can see, the G20 contains or comprises the European Union, which is a regional integration in itself. However, in Latin America, or I'm going to be more specific, in South America, there is one integration which is called the Mercosur, Mercado Común do Sur, which is the common market of the South. So this is a South American common market. that integrates Argentina, Brazil, so Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and sometimes Venezuela, underline sometimes, because Venezuela is sometimes in and sometimes out. However, what I would like to tell you is that the 85%, so if 85% of the GDP of the Mercosur comes from Brazil, approximately 13% of the Mercosur's GDP comes from Argentina, and a very tiny 2-3% comes from Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela. So what I would like to say is that basically, if we want to understand the South American continent, then actually there are two countries of reference, and actually these two countries are Brazil and Argentina. Argentina partially complementing Brazil, that is basically the first and biggest representative of the South American continent. And once more, I would like to stop here. So once more, I would like to stop here. And again, there is a possibility of activity papers hand-ins, because actually in the South American continent, there are two big economic integrations. One is the Mercosur, and the other one is the Andean community, so on the Pacific side of the South American continent. However, the two regional integrations, so the Andean community and the Mercosur, have free trade relations with each other. And if you are from, is there actually, I'm coming back to my camera, is there someone from South America from you? Sorry, I forgot. Have you got some South American members in the class? I'm not meaning only to them. However, I'm meaning it to everyone who is interested in South America. You are very, very cordially invited to write a hand-in on the regional integrations of South America. It is not compulsory, so it is not compulsory. It is just for activity papers, 10 points, just like the oil crisis and the Smithsonian Agreement. But this is a very interesting issue to understand the regional integrations of South America, how countries of South America are acting as if they were a single nation or a single market. Okay, I'm coming back to Argentina and Brazil. South Korea is very interesting. As you know, South Korea is a newly industrialized country. It is a country of East Asia, and we have all understood that after Japan, there were 4 countries, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, that demonstrated a massive catch-up process in the 1960s, and actually they graduated from the developing country status, and now they are regarded as newly industrialized countries that actually sometimes outpace the development process of the advanced or the developed countries of the world. But actually, South Korea is not only a representative of the East Asian countries. South Korea is not only a newly industrialized country as a grouping. However, there is another reason, and a very strong political reason. When the G8 was expanded to G20, please go down to sequence 1. So please go down to sequence 1. You can see that the expansion of the G8 to G20 was in 2009. As I told you, it was the consequence of the 2008 global economic downturn. It is about the summits. So actually, in the first 2 years, in 2009 and 2010, the G20 had 2 annual summits. And after that time, each and every year, there is only 1 summit. But I don't want to talk about the summits yet. I'm going to come down to the summits. But before I come to the summits, I would like to tell you that the main point why I am binding South Korea and the summit is the date. Please look at the date, 2009. So actually, the expansion of the G8 to G20 was initiated in 2009, and the first two summits were held in 2009. And please remember the then UN Secretary General. Does anyone know who the Secretary General of the United Nations was at this time? Can you remember who was the UN Sec Gen and at this time?
No.
Maybe Kofi Annan? I can't exactly remember. Kofi Annan or Ban Ki-moon?
Okay, yeah, very good. Ban Ki-moon was the Sec Gen of the United Nations from the 1st of January 2007 to the 31st of December 2016. Do you know where Ban Ki-moon was coming from?
South Korea.
Very good. Okay, so actually, it is just a political hint. Very good. Thank you for the answer. So yes, actually, South Korea was invited on one hand because of its massive economic potential in the newly industrialized countries as a major representative of East Asia. However, we all need to understand that the UN, so the United Nations, is the most comprehensive international organization of the world, had a huge impact of this broadening process, this advancement process of the G8 to G20. And yes, a former Minister of Trade in South Korea, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, as a then Secretary General of the United Nations, had a huge impact on involving his own country into this process. Yes, very good. Thank you. Mexico. Actually, it is again very interesting. When I presume that Dr. Katalin Völgyi 2 weeks ago, when she spoke about the emerging countries of the world, told that the Mexican financial crisis happened in 1994. So the Mexican financial crisis happened in 1994, followed by the Asian and Russian financial crises in 1997, 1998. Why am I mentioning the Mexican financial crisis in 1994? It is very interesting because in 1994, Mexico became the member of the integration that is called NAFTA. NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Area. So NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Area. And I'm going to come back to the Bretton Woods system for a very short touch-up, because the Bretton Woods system, had 4 pillars, now only has 3 in existence, but I'm coming down to the IMF. In 1994, the IMF had a total asset value of $100 billion. At that time, so I'm speaking about 1994. In 1994, when the IMF had a total asset value of $100 billion. Actually, it wasn't exactly 195 point something, but approximately. So the point is, $100 billion. Actually, the rule was that through special drawing rights, so through the lending process of the IMF, members of the IMF were not allowed to draw more than 10% of the IMF's total asset value, which is obviously, so 10% of $100 billion, and this is why I was rounding up the numbers, and it was less, so 95. So 10% of $100 billion is about $10 billion, which is quite obvious. Please guess how much money Mexico could draw in 1994 throughout the Mexican financial crisis? You don't need to know, just guess. Total silence. What is this total silence?
Wow.
Okay.
100 billion US dollars.
No, they couldn't take the total amount. That's bold. Thank you, thank you. No, actually they couldn't take the total money because so the limit was 10 billion, so 10%. The total was 100 billion. So obviously it is somewhere between the two. I tried to answer, but thanks for the very bold guess. It was $30 billion. So 1/3 of the IMF total assets. So 1/3 of the money what the IMF would have. So actually, and obviously the reason was because the United States of America and Canada have just created a regional integration in North America, the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Area, and then now I'm coming back to Mexico. And actually, this is what I would like to tell you if we are looking at the chart with Mexico, is that actually the entire North American continent is represented because there is the US, Canada, there is Mexico, and the South American continent, as it was said, is represented by Brazil and Argentina. So actually, Mexico is a binding force between North and South America, obviously. It is a country of over 95 million people, so a huge market that is dependent on the US and Canada, but the US and Canada are equally dependent on Mexico in an asymmetric, non-symmetric fashion. Okay, China. China needs no explanation. So China is a BRICS country. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are a political union. So they are not a regional integration, but 5 countries of the world, and especially Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So these 4 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, who actually tick the box. And I've just told what the boxes are. Huge population, huge territory, huge aggregate GDP. We are going to speak about the BRICS countries in our next class, and we are going to wrap up the analysis of countries of the world, but China is self-explanatory. China is the biggest economy of the world. So full stop, China explains itself. Indonesia. Indonesia is very interesting. Indonesia is interesting for many, many reasons. One of the reasons Indonesia is interesting is that it is in Southeast Asia. So Indonesia is in Southeast Asia, and actually Indonesia is the representative of the ASEAN community, so the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. When we were looking at the flying geese paradigm, so when we were looking at the flying geese paradigm, we have discussed that actually in the flying geese paradigm, Indonesia is a 3rd-tier country because it belongs to the ASEAN 4. So Indonesia is located obviously in Southeast Asia. Indonesia is a member of the ASEAN, so the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Indonesia is a 3rd-tier newly industrialized country. A 3rd-tier country in the flying geese paradigm after the newly industrialized countries, so a 3rd-tier country, a member of the ASEAN 4. And what I would like to say is that Indonesia it is an approximation, an estimate of the census, of the 2020 census, but Indonesia has a population of 220 million people. So actually, when we are speaking about the now centers of the global economy, then we need to underline that basically territory, population, and GDP. And when we think about the population of Indonesia, it is almost 300 million people, so 270 million people representing the ASEAN community. Let's go to Saudi Arabia. It is again very interesting. When we were speaking about the first oil crisis, we were already speaking about the OPEC countries, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Actually, Saudi Arabia again represents regional integration in West Asia. So we were speaking about the ASEAN, we were speaking about the NAFTA, we were speaking about the Mercosur, the Andean community. So actually, these are countries that are representing huge regional organizations. So what about Saudi Arabia? Our answer is very easy, GCC. So the GCC is nothing else but the Gulf Cooperation Council. So GCC is the Gulf Cooperation Council. And actually these are 6 countries in West Asia that are first and foremost based on their oil exports. And based on their oil exports, they are reinventing their economies now, and they are catching up to the developed parts of the world. As we have already discussed in our first class, our only argument about them is their very strong dependence on oil. So the question is, if we run out of fossil fuels, and for instance, cars are going to be driven with anything else but fossil fuels, the question remains if these countries are going to perform at an equal pace and level that they are performing right now. There is another question. You might ask me, why not the United Arab Emirates? So why not the Emirates? Why Saudi Arabia? Because according to Western standards, obviously the Emirates are far closer to Western ideas than Saudi Arabia, with its human rights issues and many implications. Saudi Arabia is huge. So if you look at the GCC countries, then economically, Saudi Arabia is the most dominant of the GCC countries. So this is one of the reasons why Saudi Arabia represents the entire GCC region among the G20 countries. Before I go on to Australia, I would like to invite you, because I told you that there is a possibility of handing papers on the South American regional integrations. In fact, you can write on any. So you can write on the South American integrations, you can write on the NAFTA, you can write on the ASEAN, you can write on the GCC. So if you are into regional integrations and the understanding of regional integrations in the global economy, you are cordially welcome to pick out one of these integrations and hand in a paper on one of them, as you please, so what you are interested in. And now I'm coming to Australia. Australia is again self-explanatory. Australia is a developed country in the world, and obviously one of the 5 continents, so one country, one continent. It would have been rude, and basically it would have meant a lack of common sense to omit Australia from the G20 countries. So Australia is again self-explanatory because of its development and because of its huge size of a continent. India is again self-explanatory. India is the 4th biggest economy of the world. And as I have told you, a single country with huge population, huge territory, huge aggregate GDP, and a BRICS country, so a political grouping called BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa itself. And the last one is South Africa. Actually, South Africa is not as big as the other four BRICS countries, so Russia, China, and India and Brazil. However, from the over 50 countries of the African continent, it is the most developed. So actually, to represent all regional integrations, so the entire 5 continents and all regional integrations, South Africa solely and singularly manned to represent the entire African continent within the group of G20 countries. What I would like to tell you now, so if you look at the list of countries and regional integrations, it is very interesting to understand that actually while the G7 and the G8 were countries located on the northern hemisphere of the globe, if you imagine the globe in front of your eyes, then you can realize that the G20 is a much more balanced distribution. So a G20 is a much more balanced distribution. And actually the G20 is basically a representation of all the regional integrations and all the continents of the world. And there is one more thing I would like to add, because I'm a huge fan of the G20. Once more, please do not forget that the G20 is nothing else but a crisis committee. So actually, crises happens in the 1970s, crises happen in the mid-19 and late 1990s, crises happen in 2008, 2010, and also currently. So please don't forget that this pandemic, because of which we are in an online form, so 2020-21, this is also a crisis. And actually, this crisis committee, so the G20 countries, are invited to give answers to the factual crisis downturns of the world. Economic, health crisis, and so on, financial, and so on and so forth. And I would like to underline one more thing, which is hugely interesting and important for myself as well, that whereas actually I've been teaching in the higher education for over 24 years. So for really, it is an interesting time span for myself. And actually, while approximately 10 or 20 or 15, 20, 15, 10 years ago, when I was asked by students to define the center of the world, I mean the economic center of the world, 15 years ago, I automatically said that this is the G8. So 15 years ago, I said that this is the G8. So Europe, US, Japan, plus Russia. So, but basically Europe, US, and Japan. Actually, when I'm asked today, so if you'd ask me today how I define the economic center of the world, I'd say G20. So I'd say that the center of the world is the G20, and I'll tell you why. If we accept the fact that there are 193 UN nations, but approximately there are 200 countries of the world, in the UN General Assembly, you cannot make effective decisions because you cannot make an effective decision with almost 200 participants. But you can make good decisions with 20 participants because the group is not too big and not too small. So actually, this is why I told you that I'm a very huge fan of the G20. And now I am asking you to kindly scroll down on this page. So kindly scroll down on this page. And actually, I would like to tell you that as I told you previously, that there are always summits and there are always presidencies. So there are always summits and there are always presidencies. And actually, the summits are always hosted by the president of the G20. As I have told you, because the 2008 financial and economic crisis was so severe, actually there were two summits, one held in the UK followed, so concluded in US in Pittsburgh, and there was another in L'Aquila in Italy. And in 2010, there were two in Canada, one in Toronto, one in Osaka, and there was one in between. So the Toronto summit concluded in Seoul in Korea. But then in 2011, so then in 2011, it was decided that later on, so that later on, one summit per year would be enough. So one summit per year would be enough, which didn't happen till 2019. So actually the entire community went on with 2 summits per year, and the 1 summit per year idea, or 1 summit per year notion, only came into existence in 2019. However, there is always one country that is hosting, that is presiding the G20 grouping. There is one more thing I would like to mention. In 2014, the Russian membership was suspended. So the Russian membership was suspended, and there was one reason, because this community, so the community of the G20 didn't accept Russia's annexion of Crimea. So actually, to react on the Russian annexion of Crimea, the G7 nations, then G7 nations, suspended the participation of Russia. However, Russia cannot really be excluded from any regional or political organization of the world. So you cannot really circumvent Russia. It is impossible. Russia is a member of the BRICS countries. It was just a political hint of the developed countries of the world to indicate Russia that this political attitude is not really acceptable. I am going to share with you one more link. So I'm going to share with you one more link, which I find hugely important. And it is about the presidencies. So it is about the presidencies. I'll tell you why. Because as you can see, or you cannot see, but you will see it immediately. So in 2021, so the 2021, the summit is going to be scheduled. So for 2021, the summit is going to be scheduled for June 11th and 3rd in the United Kingdom, and later on Australia, India, and South Korea. And why I am telling you this, so why is it important? Because actually this one summit per year cannot be upheld anymore. So this one summit per year, again, cannot be upheld anymore, because there is such a crisis because of the pandemic, that this year the UK will have the first summit on. So the United Kingdom will have this summit, and Australia, India, and South Korea will be invited as guest countries holding the summit, and actually finding a path to resolving the problems generated by the pandemic. So what I would like to show you is this one. So this one, I'm going to share you the link I'm going to share you the link immediately. There you go. So please open the link. And as you can see, currently, so the presidency of the G20 is held by Italy. As you have understood, there are there is a rotation. So there is a rotation. And what I would like to tell you, that there is always a topic. So there is always a topic for the presidency. And as you can see in this link, the Italian presidency has 3 keywords: people. You can click on the side, so it goes over. The second keyword is planet. So people, planet, you can again click on it and go back. And the third keyword is prosperity. So currently there is an Italian presidency, and the Italian presidency has 3 keywords. It is people, planet, and prosperity. And before we wrap up the class, I would like to give you an opportunity, a last hand-in paper. As you can see, there were many summits throughout the entire existence of the G6, G7, G8, and G20. You are cordially invited to write a 10-pager on the topics, on the issues of the G20 presidencies. So this year it is again people, planet, prosperity, and you can explain. But actually we have no time to cover the time span of 1975 and 2021 because it is huge. So actually we would lose our entire global economics class on covering the topics of the G20 from 1975 to 2021. However, again, you are very cordially invited to write a chronological paper. So the chronological paper on the topics of the G6, G7, G8, and G20, because you don't need to write long. So the entire thing should be, again, 10 pages, but you will learn massively on the issues that needed to be tackled by the G20 community in the past 45 years of its existence. So actually the G20 that we date back to 1975 is 45 years old. And to understand the 45-year history of this economic grouping, we can understand it in a best fashion of the issues, the topics covered in these 45 years by the summits and the presidencies. So it is very interesting to understand it. Okay, so this is what I would like to tell you. We've got four minutes more, and I would like to invite you to ask questions, to make comments. So I would like to wrap up the class because next week we are going to go on with the BRICS countries, and then we are concluding with the grouping of nation states in the global economy. But I'm asking you if you've got any questions, any comments, any remarks. So you're very cordially invited. I cannot see you. Can you please switch your cameras on and ask questions or make remarks, comments? I'm really okay. There's one in a chat box. What is the format of the exam? It is going to be an oral exam, and it is uploaded into the Moodle system. Questions and answers, one-on-one questions and answers. Because unfortunately, it is highly unlikely that we are going to switch back to normal. And while we are online, we are going to have online oral exams. Actually, I was hoping for a switch back to regular education, but I'm going to be very honest, I'm losing hope. Have you got more questions, please?
Is the information on how to do the activity paper on Cell Learning?
You don't need to. You don't. We actually, there is no formal requirement. As I told you in the first class, I only need 10 pages and references. And this is what I told you, that while I'm going through the class and while I'm touching up on information that might be relevant to you, but actually cannot fit into the explanation, I'm just opening up issues that might be relevant for you. This is one option. The second option is that you indicate me what you are interested in, and then we discuss it in a one-on-one fashion, and you can also write a hand-in paper on a chosen issue indicated by you. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Have you got further questions, please?
I have one question, but it's maybe
Yeah, please go ahead.
It's not exactly to global economics. I just would like to, with the end of the Bretton Woods system, I think they created this SDR, and I never really understood of how it worked. We learned a little bit about in international economics.
Yeah. The SDR system is a system of the IMF. This is what I was exactly referring to. The special. Are you referring to the special drawing rights system of the IMF, or what are you referring?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is what I was referring to throughout the Mexico financial crisis. So that these were special drawing rights of the IMF, and actually it was 10% of the total asset value. This is what I was referring to.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Again, this is
it's not really working as they intended to be,
because
I
absolutely
they wanted to replace the gold standard or whatever, so it's a
no, the gold standard system was replaced by the floating exchange rate system by other countries. Okay. to the US dollars, but this flexible floating didn't work either. Actually, I've got 1 minute, so I'm not going to go. I do apologize. I'm not going to go in it now because then we lose track. However, thank you very much for the question, because if you wish to write anything and do research on the exchange rate systems after the Bretton Woods system, I mean, you are cordially welcome. So if you wish to exchange on these pages, so where I have, actually, if you type in, there's tons of material. If you write in Bretton Woods system, first oil crisis, and Smithsonian agreement as keywords, you are going to find millions of material, really millions of material. So the keywords are Smithsonian agreement, 1971, first oil crisis, and gold standard system, or closing the gold window, and you are going to find millions of information, or Bretton Woods system itself.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Or the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. Millions, actually millions of information. Actually, I'm just trying to fit into 90 minutes. This is why I'm giving the possibilities for activity papers. Have you got more questions, please? Okay, so then have a nice week. We are going to wrap up here and see you next week. Everything is going to be uploaded to the Moodle system, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.